Number 10, Sin Eater. I actually had no idea this was a thing, but a Sin Eater is a person who consumes a ritual meal in order to spiritually take on the sins of a deceased person. The food was believed to absorb the sins of said person, thus absolving the person of their sins. But Sin Eaters, as a consequence, carried the sins of all people whose sins they had eaten, and for that reason, they were usually feared and shunned. When Stanley Carter was a youngling, his horrible grandfather's congregation held a sin-eating ritual for the elder Carter. This is where Stanley witnessed a Sin Eater for the first time, and weirdly enough, Stanley felt a kinship with the Sin Eater, since he believed himself to also carry the burdens of his own father's sins. As an adult, Stanley became an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., working in research and development when he was injected with some experimental chemicals to increase his strength and endurance. The downside is that they also made Carter turn rather extremely mad, which led to his resignation from S.H.I.E.L.D. So, instead, he became a detective. I don't know. Carter became obsessed with taking out anyone who sinned and or abused their authority, becoming the Sin Eater, while also simultaneously working on his own case as a detective. Eventually, he was sent to the afterlife, but this actually empowered him more as he was resurrected with the abilities to turn people's sins into monsters, teleportation, and the ability to absorb the powers of those supervillains who he cleansed.
And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, be sure to show us you love us by clicking that like button. Do it.
Turn you into spaghetti.
I will. I'll do it. You better do it right now. Number 9, Beyond Corporation. The Beyond Corporation was probably one of the coolest new villainous organizations to rear its head in the Spider-Man comics. And the super cool thing about it, it's actually not as new as you think. If you were introduced to the Beyond Corporation via the Spider-Man Beyond event, you might be surprised to hear that it's actually been around since 2006 in the comics. True fact. Beyond only made about 42 appearances so far, but its first appearance actually happened not during the Beyond event in ASM, and nor during the Point Bays for that event, but back in Next Wave issue number 1. Beyond actually gets its name from the true all-powerful beings behind it, who are, you guessed it, Beyonders. So while Maxine danger might send a shiver down your spine, I know she did in mine, the real danger isn't even just in the corporation or those who manage it, but the cosmic threat running it all.
Number 8, Swarm. Now, personally, I don't find bees or wasps to be inherently scary, but that's because generally we only deal with 1 or 2, maybe 3 at a time. When these insects become truly terrifying is when there are literally thousands of them. That's probably what the sinister German toxologist and expert beekeeper Fritz von Meyer thought when he found a pretty unique hive of killer bees in South America. The bees seemed to show absolutely no fear. They were super passive, and they also seemed to possess a highly developed intelligence. Under the belief that a nearby meteorite bombardment had actually mutated the bees with radiation, because this is a comic book, von Meyer built a device that he hoped would reawaken the bees' killer instincts so that they could and would serve him. Problem is, von Meyer had done diddly goofed so that while the bees were no longer passive like he wanted, they were not in his control, which is decidedly not what he wanted. The killer bees began to swarm over von Meyer, taking his life, but something curious happened. In the chaos of losing his life to the swarm, von Meyer's consciousness shredded, dissipating into the swarm itself. Swarm is intangible, as his body is basically just a cloud of tiny little forms. He can fly through the air or assume any shape and size he desires, and as long as the queen bee lives, he can always reconstitute himself, making him really hard to beat.
Number 7, Mysterio. Mysterio is a villain that is often seen as being all smoke and mirrors and illusions, which makes a lot of folks consider him to be a not-so-real threat. Still, in the cinematic take on the character, we saw Mysterio almost completely fool the entire world. Or while even being defeated, he still kinda did. His plan there was to convince everyone he was a hero and win them over to his side, and even despite seemingly dying, which I'm not even convinced that's really what happened there, he actually still managed to succeed. In the Old Man Logan universe, Mysterio is also the one behind defeating all of the X-Men by tricking Wolverine into thinking all of his friends were really supervillains, thereby getting him to kill the entire X-Men team and school. Yikes. In other words, just because something isn't real doesn't mean that you shouldn't still fear it. A great illusion can be more powerful and useful sometimes than the real thing.
Number 6, Morlun and the Inheritors. When Marvel brought on writer J. Michael Straczynski as the writer of Amazing Spider-Man, I don't think anyone realized it would lead to some of the most controversial moments in the Wall Crawler's history. One of these moments was the idea that the radioactive science fiction spider, which bit Peter Parker, was apparently now the emissary of a mystical spider god, making Spider-Man Spider-Man no longer simply a sci-fi created hero, but also a supernatural one. This meant he needed supernatural enemies too. Enter Morlun and the Inheritors. Essentially, Morlun is a vampire, but instead of feasting on blood, Morlun and his family feed off energy from animal god avatars called totems, and spider totems, like Spider-Man in particular, are their favorite. Morlun hits hard. Despite being defeated a few times by Spider-Man, he always ends up coming back, because he and his fellow Inheritors clone themselves, moving their life force over to the clone, making them effectively immortal unless their life force is completely depleted.
Number 5, the Goblin Queen. Although it's an unconventional pick for this list, considering Maddie typically isn't known for being a Spider-Man villain and currently isn't even really a true villain right now in the comics, Madeline Pryor's Goblin Queen was featured as one of the main villains in the Spider-Man event Dark Web, which means I can include her on my list. Huzzah! The Goblin Queen is actually one of the most powerful foes that Spider-Man has probably ever faced, with the combined power of Jean Grey being her clone and the dark demonic power and demon army of Limbo behind her. Madeline Pryor felt pretty unstoppable during this event. Thank goodness Jean was able to intervene and help Peter and the other heroes out by swaying Maddie back over to the side of good. That's all I'm gonna say.
Huzzah! Number 4, the Lizard/Shed. After losing his arm in an explosion, Dr. Curtis Connors devoted his life to creating a serum to regenerate lost limbs. Using DNA from reptiles who naturally regrew lost limbs, Connors created a serum he was sure would work. And it did, but it also turned him to an extremely large lizard monster. Hate when that happens. Now, that is quite terrifying enough, with Connors being unable to control himself in his lizard form. He became a massive threat with super strength, speed, durability, healing, stamina, agility, wall crawling, and all the power of being a massive lizard, with the ability to psionically control other reptiles. But wait, there's even more. In an extremely gruesome turn of events, when the lizard personality ate Kurt Connors' son, Billy, whatever human personality inside of the lizard went completely silent. This allowed the lizard to run rampant, becoming a new and more powerful version of this already powerful monster called the Shed. The Shed was huge and much more powerful than the lizard had ever been. The Shed even somehow developed psychic abilities as well. Luckily, Spider-Man did defeat the Shed by showing it pictures of Billy, which helped to reawaken the human side of the monster and brought him back to a more manageable size. But still, he was scary.
Number 3, Green Goblin. Norman Osborn is often known as the villain Green Goblin. He is one of Spider-Man's most iconic villains, if not the most iconic rogue he happens to have, I would say, in his gallery. Their rivalry is an old one, going all the way back to the first appearance of the character in the 1960s, where Osborn first appeared not in his civilian form, but simply as the villain, Green Goblin. Green Goblin has constantly been presented to fans and seen by them as the greatest and most iconic Spider-Man villain that we have today, and almost no list would be complete without him when it comes to Spider-Man's villains. And considering how much twisted harm he has caused to both Spider-Man's role as a hero and Peter Parker's very own everyday life, I think we can consider him one of the most horrifying. Yeah?
Number 2, Red Vulture. Jimmy Natal was a fixer for the mob whose job was to clean up the messes that others made. Now over time, the workload became way too much for him to handle, and he went to his superiors requesting help. He suggested picking a candidate to mutate into a human-vulture hybrid using the same technology that created the Scorpion and the Fly, because, I mean, yeah, of all the options that seems the most efficient and sane. It turns out that his bosses agreed with him though, and the candidate they chose was Jimmy himself. Under the impression that the operation would cause memory loss, he was forcibly turned into a new vulture. Being mutated into a man-eating monster, Jimmy gained massive skin-colored mandibles instead of a normal mouth, he gained acidic vomit, real wings, and super strength, and he became pretty much an animal, flying around, screeching, and eating people, being used by organized criminals and other villains, and eventually regaining some memories which just gave him specific targets to bring down before he was eventually deleted from the world of the living by the Punisher.
Number 1, Sleepstealer. Sleepstealer is one of the most horrifying new Spider-Man villains on the scene. Most people also might not be aware of this villain just yet, considering he really only appeared in one singular series, the spine-tingling Spider-Man comic, which is from Marvel's Infinity line and can exclusively be found on Marvel Unlimited. The Infinity line is basically comprised of short comics which you kind of like scroll down through, kind of like webtoons. They have a really awesome format, and Sleepstealer is eerily revealed to be the major villain in this first short volume. He messed with Peter's mind, haunts his victims' nightmares, and ultimately leaves the hero feeling extremely sleep deprived. Oh, and he also has like literally the creepiest theme song ever.
It's spooky.
It's spooky.
Number 10, Doctor Doom. Doctor Doom and Spider-Man do not fight in the same weight class at all. However, in their first ever encounter, Spider-Man did manage to get the better of Doom, and that may have stung. So, in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1, number 349 and 350, it did not go well for the wall crawler at all. This time, Spidey was tracking an elderly jewel thief named the Black Fox, who had stolen the priceless Trask Diamond. Black Fox had also happened to barter one of Victor Von Doom's family heirlooms, an emerald passed down to him by his late mother. Once Doom became aware of this transgression, he flew to New York and caught up with the Black Fox at the same time Spider-Man did. When Spidey intervened on the Black Fox's behalf, Dr. Doom did not hold back. Doom nonchalantly thrashed the hell out of the web-slinger, leaving him with his costume in tatters and desperately scrambling away for his life. While he convinced Doom to allow him time to retrieve his old family heirloom, Peter's severe beating had left him concussed, so much so that he even hallucinated Uncle Ben. The beating he took taught Spidey an important lesson about recognizing his own limits. Number 9. Kingpin. Now, I'll admit, we at Top 10 Nerd, like a lot of comic book nerds, love to talk about the time that Peter Parker nearly ended Wilson Fisk's life, beating the heck out of him in prison in front of all of his goons. He embarrassed the heck out of Fisk that day, but that was all to prove that he can, because there have been numerous times where the Kingpin has shown Spider-Man the error of his ways. Take the very first meeting, for example. In The Amazing Spider-Man number 50 and 52, this is the famous arc where Spider-Man gives up being a superhero, and in his absence, the Kingpin jumps at the opportunity. The comic makes it pretty clear that Spider-Man assumes that Kingpin is just some big squishy overweight man. This proves to be a pretty rough mistake. Kingpin is much faster and much stronger than Spider-Man initially realizes, being actually composed of almost entirely muscle. He gets Peter with a good grab and slam, and then out of left field, he uses a gas to knock out the Spider by the end of issue number 51. Now, issue number 52 sees Kingpin's goons putting Spider-Man and J. Jonah Jameson in an extremely supervillainy chamber, locking them up and slowly filling it with water. Sure, Spider-Man does escape, but even the final fight against Kingpin sees the villain get a bunch of good hits and even escape. Number 8. Mephisto. One More Day is infamous among Spider-Man fans, and understandably so. The story completely retconned Spider-Man's marriage to Mary Jane Watson out of continuity, and it was all thanks to Mephisto. And poor choices by Marvel, but whatever. This was a relationship that had been built up over literal decades, that had been carried over into the movies, the newspaper strip, every other version of Spider-Man. It was arguably Marvel's best romance, and Mephisto took it all away in exchange for saving Aunt May's life. The storyline takes place after Marvel's Civil War crossover, where Spider-Man revealed his secret identity to the world. In the fallout after Civil War, dozens of villains targeted Peter Parker and his loved ones, including Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, and Peter's Aunt May was caught in the crossfire. Desperate to save May Parker's life, Spider-Man went to anyone and everyone to find some way to avert disaster. When no one else came through though, the devil himself, Mephisto, offered Peter a treacherous trade. May's life in exchange for Peter and MJ's marriage. Now, love it or hate it, it happened, and it made Spider-Man give up his greatest love ever. Number 7. Black Tarantula. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't know much about Black Tarantula before this day, but now that I do, I actually really like him. He's super cool. So, showing up in The Amazing Spider-Man 432, Black Tarantula seemingly attacks our spider hero out of nowhere, chucking half a chimney at him as his first move. Now, while Spider-Man tries to figure out who the heck this guy is and why he is after Spider-Man in the first place, he is dodging out of the way of optic blasts, massive punches, and even his webs do nothing as Tarantula just rips through them like tissue paper. Spider-Man even has a whole flashback about how Mary Jane wanted him to quit being Spider-Man during this fight, which was interrupted as Black Tarantula smashes through the wall that Spider-Man was standing on. Spider-Man ends up floating down to an alleyway, and while he gets maybe 2 or 3 punches on Tarantula, when the villain gets his hand on Spider-Man's ankle, it's all over. He slams Peter between the alleyway walls and down onto the pavement. He then literally rips off Peter's mask, revealing his bruised face before telling him that he is sparing him so he can find Norman Osborn's missing child, but when he's done that, Spider-Man needs to leave New York. He then walks off, leaving Peter in the fetal position, counting his injuries and thanking his stars that he's still alive. Number 6. Cadaverous. Ivan Renz was an employee of Stark Industries alongside his mentor and Peter Parker's parents. They developed the Key, a tech that could potentially bring people back to life, but the experiments failed, sending his mentor to the afterlife. Now, Tony Stark dismantled the unit, and Ivan eventually became the supervillain known as Cadaverous, only ever appearing in the J.J. and Henry Abrams written Bloodline Spider-Man storyline from 2019. Mary Jane Watson loses her life to Cadaverous on the 5th page of the first issue after Spider-Man is swarmed and beaten pretty badly by him and his minions. Then Spider-Man just completely quits. 12 years later, the story has a one-armed version of Peter Parker, who is now the honestly pretty horrible single father of Ben Parker, Peter and Mary Jane's son. After Cadaverous returns out of hiding and kidnaps Peter to use his blood for his evil plans, it's up to the new Spider-Man, Ben Parker, with the help of his friend Faye Ito and old Tony Stark and Riri Williams, to fight Cadaverous and his minions, which includes a cyber-zombified team of Avengers. Number 5, Doc Ock. Okay, so being one of Spider-Man's major arch-enemies, Doc Ock has had quite a few different instances of bringing Peter down a peg or two. Today, we're going to talk about the curious case of Otto's adamantium tentacles. So, way back in the day, Dr. Octopus happened to get his hands on some adamantium octopus arms. They were put out of commission and weirdly forgot about for a very long time until they made a spectacular proper return in Spider-Man 1990 issue 18 and issue 19. This is the Revenge of the Sinister Six arc, and not only does Otto manage to make quick work of the entire Sinister Six to take control, even turning the Sandman into glass, when Spider-Man crashes the party, Otto manages to get a hold of him and slam him all over the place, tearing massive holes in Spider-Man's costume and throwing him hundreds of meters away out of the building they were fighting in. He even manages to completely thrash Professor Hulk with these arms too. It's actually kinda nuts. Number 4, the Sandman. Okay, now look, this does absolutely take place in an alternate Earth, but it takes place on Earth Z, with versions of Spider-Man and Sandman who are canonically exactly the same, with all the same abilities as their usual selves. And that makes it terrifying. Allow me to explain. In Marvel Zombies Returns, the zombie heroes Spider-Man and Luke Cage end up on Earth 91126. Zombie Spider-Man thinks he can cure their zombie virus by finding the Lifeline tablet, but just as he is getting underway with the plan, he gets mistaken for this Earth's normal Spider-Man who went to go change his costume. It's really weird. He's then forced into a fight with Dr. Octopus, Electro, Mysterio, Vulture, Kraven, and Sandman, aka the Sinister Six. Despite trying his best to hold back his hunger, zombie Spider-Man completely lets go and brutalizes the entire squad of villains, with Sandman literally being the only survivor fleeing for his life. So, when the actual normal Spider-Man shows back up and confronts Sandman, having no idea what just happened, the terrified Sandman does not even try to let this Spider-Man anywhere close to him. He slams him ruthlessly with these massive sand mallets before turning into sand and forcing himself into Peter's mouth, landing inside of his stomach, and then bursting Spider-Man from the inside out. Say what you will about the extreme nature of this comic, but this is entirely possible for the Sandman to do anytime he wants, and that is terrifying. Number 3, Electro. The Marvel Knights Spider-Man comic series was written with a more mature slant than previous Spider-Man titles. After a brutal fight with the Green Goblin in which Peter came out on top, Peter gets home only to find his beloved Aunt May has been kidnapped. His ensuing hunt leads him to the Owl, who tells him that Electro and the Vulture were the culprits. In a rage, Spider-Man finds the two and a massive fight breaks out as they're attempting to steal a big old chunk of change. Once their briefcase of money gets launched open, sending the money flying all over the place, Old Max loses his patience and blasts Spider-Man with a massive electroshock that also causes a huge explosion. Now, with Electro revealing his new costume, he manages to get on powerful blasts one after another on Spider-Man, controlling metal objects and firing them all at Spider-Man and innocent bystanders, blowing up cars full of civilians before revealing how his time in prison has allowed him to come up with new ways to use his powers, including ionizing metal, as he literally slams a semi-truck onto Spider-Man. At the end of the fight, Spider-Man learns that the Owl tricked him and was only using him for his own needs. In that moment of realization, Electro is able to blast him off of a skyscraper, sending him straight to the emergency room. Number 2, Paul. Paul is straight up just a dick. For those of you who do not know, Paul is a very recent addition to the Spider-Man comics, and he is none other than Mary Jane's new squeeze. He also really randomly happens to have kids with MJ? I don't know, but what I do know is that he is a menace. Paul is the son of Emissary, but from a different reality entirely. That doesn't really matter, he did totally take out the villain himself, so he's not really a villain, but he stole Peter Parker's girl and spent 4 years with her due to time dilation, even adopting 2 kids. He's punched out Peter Parker and was defended by MJ herself. He then had the audacity to pay off some of Peter's medical fees out of sympathy, and then invited him to dinner sometime. Paul and MJ stayed together, and Peter has wanted her back the whole time since, and quite honestly, screw Paul, I hate him. Number 1, Spike. Now, most of you may think you don't know who Spike is, but I promise you, everyone knows who Spike is. Spike just happened to be a low-level criminal burglar operating in New York around the same time that Peter Parker started his journey as Spider-Man. This burglar had been the cellmate of the infamous Depression-era gangster Dutch Malone. In the 1930s, Malone lived in New York City's Forest Hills neighborhood. It was long rumored that Malone had hidden millions of dollars away somewhere in that house, and the burglar heard Malone talking in his sleep about where he hid the money. Spike the burglar next showed up in the hallway of a Manhattan television studio just as the young, naive Spider-Man stepped out of his dressing room. Having robbed the studio's office and being chased by security guard Baxter Bigelow, Spider-Man refused to help, allowing the burglar to make it into the elevator and escape. Turns out this would cost him, as this is the very same burglar who would break into that house in Forest Hills, owned by the Parker family, and accidentally take the life of Uncle Ben, teaching Peter an important lesson about power and responsibility. Coming in at number 10 today is Kraven the Hunter. Kraven the Hunter's comic book tale seemingly came to an end in one of the most shocking Spider-Man stories ever. Kraven's last hunt finally sees the Hunter get the drop on Spider-Man. Sticking Spidey in the neck with a dart and then burying Spider-Man 6 feet under, Kraven actually beat his adversary, which only a handful of villains can actually claim to have accomplished. Thinking Peter Parker is down and out, Kraven weirdly then takes on Spider-Man's costume, or a copy of the black Spider-Man costume, and he hunts down criminals. In an attempt to prove himself that he's better than Spider-Man, he defeated Vermin, a villain that Spider-Man couldn't defeat without help from Captain America. Unfortunately, the whole thing still ends in tragedy for Kraven. Spider-Man digs himself out of the grave and renders Kraven's victory kind of moot, but Kraven also had accomplished his main goal by besting Spider-Man, something that not a lot of people can confidently say, like I said. Convincing himself that he has no reason to live anymore, Kraven chooses to defeat himself permanently. Number 9, Morlun. Coming Home was a Spider-Man story written by J. Michael Straczynski that introduced readers to a fresh new mystical adversary named Morlun. Now, Morlun was an energy vampire who thrived on the life forces of individuals who were powered up by animal totems, and the spider totems, like Spider-Man, were his favorite. In every aspect, Morlun surpassed Spider-Man. He possessed superior strength, speed, and thousands of years of experience. Although Spider-Man managed to emerge victorious in their initial encounter, he couldn't deny the intensity of the battle. So, of course, in their second confrontation, Morlun proved to be absolutely devastating. Morlun dominated Spider-Man, leaving him battered and broken like never before. Morlun even managed to send Spider-Man off with a round-trip ticket to the pits of Tartarus. Now, while Spider-Man's demise was only temporary, his return marked a transformation, turning Spider-Man into basically a monster with newfound abilities that actually allowed him to take the victory. This battle stands out as one of the most crushing defeats Spider-Man has ever endured. Number 8, Juggernaut. Juggernaut is one of the few Marvel heavyweights you just shouldn't cross paths with. Even the heroic heavy hitters know this, but when he rampaged through New York City like an unstoppable force in the Amazing Spider-Man number 229 to 230, Spider-Man had no choice but to intervene. Now, it turns out, getting involved was far more than Spider-Man could really handle. Once Juggernaut set himself in motion, nothing could halt him, and Peter learned this the extremely hard way. Over 2 whole comic book issues, Spider-Man exerted all his might against Juggernaut, and it was all futile, as a regular spider trying to stop a train. Spider-Man could do absolutely nothing, and he got completely pummeled. Now, of course, Spider-Man did eventually take the win, but it wasn't anything he physically did that got him the victory. It was actually his brain that stepped in. Juggernaut actually ended up being caught in wet cement, and I gotta be honest, I really don't think that wet cement would actually actually stop this guy, but they had to get Spider-Man out alive somehow. Number 7, Doc Ock. Dr. Octopus is one of these Spider-Man villains that has a very serious claim at being the primary adversary to Peter Parker. He has consistently given Spider-Man enough grief to cause wrinkles, but then Otto is also one of the few villains to absolutely defeat his hero. When Otto was beginning to lose his life, he managed to find a way to transfer his consciousness into the body of Peter Parker, while transferring Peter's consciousness into his failing body. Peter ended up completely passing away, at least temporarily, inside the body of his adversary, while Otto gained an incredibly powerful body and a new, slightly heroic personality, becoming the superior Spider-Man. But Spider-Ock, or Spock as the fans call him, changes things. He took his genius and experience and applied it, making an awesome new suit, spider bots, and mechanical arms. He also straight up took villains to their graves and even single-handedly defeated the Sinister Six, taking the living brain as a trophy. He completely dumps MJ, but starts a relationship with Anna Maria Marconi, who became a popular addition to the Spider-Man canon. He purged Carly Cooper of the Goblin Serum, helped Aunt May walk again, got Peter his PhD, mainly for clout, and built a scientific empire that would make him a multi-billionaire. He made himself a much more efficient hero than Spider-Man ever could be. Or was. Number 6, Magic and Colossus. Now, yes, neither of these guys are villains. Not normally, but they definitely became villains, and that's what we are going to talk about. In the Avengers vs. X-Men event, a group of 5 X-Men were granted quite the power boost in the form of the Phoenix Force, which came to Earth for Hope Summers. Now, thanks to Tony Stark, it was split into 5 parts, and that's when it inhabited the bodies of those 5 X-Men. The mutant siblings Colossus and Magic were 2 of these X-Men. Now, Spider-Man is physically no match for either one of these guys, not with the Phoenix Force at least. When he ended up facing them both in the 9th issue of the event, Spider-Man got completely beaten to a pulp. It was brutal, but of course, he still has that charming personality and beautiful brain. It turns out that when one of the avatars for the Phoenix Force is defeated, the power of the remaining avatars gets boosted up even more, and it ended up that there were only a few of them left. Even though he was completely wrecked, Spider-Man gives them a little innocent reminder of the fact that if one of them is defeated, the other one will gain even more power. Now, we don't get to see the fight that takes place between the 2 of them. Instead, we get to see the unconscious bodies of both of them, with Spider-Man still barely standing to let everyone know he got them to knock each other out. But they still completely wrecked the web-slinger. Number 5, the Thunderbolts. Thanks to the MCU, Robert Downey Jr. and Tom Holland, most people believe that Spider-Man and Tony Stark are as thick as thieves. And they are. In the MCU. There was a time where comic book Tony Stark and Peter Parker got along. In the beginning of the comic book Civil War event, Peter was all for Tony's Superhuman Registration Act, and this was partially because of the way Peter admired Tony Stark. But Iron Man was totally using this admiration to his advantage. He used Peter's naivety to convince Spider-Man to unmask himself to the world, which caused untold amounts of problems for the hero, not only in that story, but even outside of it. It even sort of indirectly led to the split between Peter and Mary Jane Watson. Now, one of Tony's methods for enforcing the Superhuman Registration Act was deputizing villains to hunt down Captain America's forces as the Thunderbolts. When Spider-Man made his getaway from Iron Man's forces, the Thunderbolts were on him like hotcakes, and if it wasn't for the intervention of the Punisher, Peter could have 100% lost his life, and he almost did. Number 4, Carnage. The red symbiotes always seem to be the worst of the worst, and the one that would be born from Venom himself seems to be the worst of the worst of the worst. When Eddie Brock was briefly detached from the Venom symbiote, he was imprisoned, and his cellmate was none other than Cletus Cassidy, a psychotic serving 11 consecutive life sentences in Rikers Island. Now, when Venom showed up and bust Eddie out of prison, it produced its first offspring as a result of Thanos seeking the Infinity Gems out in space, which is the weirdest reason, but that's what happened. Now, Spider-Man learned the hard way that Carnage was absolutely no joke. The Carnage symbiote was not vulnerable to the same things that Venom was, and his strength and speed were greater than both Spider-Man and Venom. Not to mention, he was absolutely ruthless, even more aggressive than Venom, and with all the lethal of Venom and not a smidge of the Protector. The wall crawler had to call for help to fight Carnage, and from none other than one of his own villains. Number 3, Venom. That villain that he ended up calling in for help against Carnage was none other than Venom himself. Now, Venom has had an interesting time in comic books, going from villain to anti-hero, back to villain, and now to just straight up a hero. But when he first showed up, he was absolutely just a villain. Eddie Brock and the symbiote shared a personal vendetta against Spider-Man, and they united in their hate for him, literally bonding over it. Venom posed a huge threat to Spider-Man, becoming a villain that gave Peter a run for his money more than once and in more than one medium. The symbiote's unique ability to bypass Spider-Man's spider sense stripped the hero of his primary defense that has helped him on so many other occasions. And on top of that, Venom was even stronger and more durable than Spider-Man, with sharp, pointy teeth and a hell of a lot of extra symbiote abilities that the webhead was just not prepared to deal with. Their initial encounters were intense, with Spider-Man often on the receiving end of brutal beatings. This forced Spider-Man to adapt his fighting style drastically, as the symbiote-covered villain was relentless in his pursuit of the hero's demise. Number 2, Green Goblin. He threw Gwen Stacy off the George Washington Bridge, orchestrated the Clone Saga, and wiped out Ben Reilly right in front of Peter Parker. Norman Osborn is absolutely Spider-Man's #1 adversary, simply for the fact that he has caused Peter more emotional pain than any of his other villains, even Doc Ock. Now, obviously, everything that I mentioned was Norman, but Harry Osborn was also the Green Goblin, adding physical and emotional turmoil to the whole thing. Now, I don't think I need to pick one event in particular, but I would say that Gwen Stacy was the worst of the bunch. Green Goblin proved to Spider-Man that he is not able to save everyone. Even though Peter was so close, he still failed, and when you think about it, Green Goblin made it so that Peter was the one to shoot the web that broke Gwen's back. He may not have known that's how it would go down, but he lucked out with that move, not only terrorizing Peter, but completely psychologically tormenting the poor guy. And finally, in at #1 today, it's the Spot. Jonathan Owen is a villain that only well-versed fans of Spider-Man would recognize, or it used to be that way before Across the Spider-Verse came out. Now, as the Spot, Jonathan hasn't always been the most relevant villain of Peter Parker. He often ends up on lists of Spider-Man's worst and unknown villains. I mean, when he first confronted Spider-Man and announced his villain moniker in Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man Volume 1, Issue 99 in 1985, the hero hit the ground laughing. Literally, he fell on the ground and was laughing. It was bad. But it made it all the more embarrassing for Spider-Man when the Spot actually defeated him. Spot threw Peter in and out of his dimensions using his hole portals, and he landed more than a few good punches on the hero. The Spot doesn't hit hard, but as he says, even the strongest of trees can be felled by sufficient strokes from even the smallest of hatchets. Yes, he said that. I know it's weird. Eventually, he left Peter discombobulated, with Black Cat having to help him back to his feet. He got his own back eventually, but still, the Spot took him down.